U.S. President-elect Donald Trump starting to make moves, building a new team for his second term in the Oval Office. Potentially big changes coming to the political landscape in America, but how will it affect us here in Canada? Political science professor Nelson Wiseman from the University of Toronto joins us now to discuss this further. Nelson, welcome.
Thank you, Amandalina.
So what are your thoughts on this? In what ways do you see a second Trump presidency impacting Canada?
Well, to some extent, it's difficult to tell because Trump is so mercurial that he can change his mind from one moment to the next. Very impulsive. We saw this in a number of areas. For example, during the election campaign in the U.S. on issues like abortion, during his first term about closing the government and then switching his position. What's going to be very important in Canadian-American relations is the personal relationship between our Prime Minister and Donald Trump, the President. It appears that we're going to have an election. We have to have an election within the next year. If the election happens sooner, we are probably going to get a new Prime Minister. Pierre Poilievre is best positioned for that. So that changes personalities. For Trump, he likes to have people come to him on bended knee. So if you do that, everything is fine. But then if you say something as Justin Trudeau did a few years ago when the G7 last met in Canada, all of a sudden Trump changes his position and describes Trudeau as weak and a wimp, essentially. And incidentally, the G7 is now going to be held in Canada again next year. So personal dynamics are very important between the two leaders, because that sets the tone for how the administrations will relate to each other. And then there are concrete policy challenges. I would say a leading challenge is the safe third-party agreement between Canada and the United States. If Trump is serious about deporting people, rounding them up, a lot of these people will head for the Canadian border. And although we have an agreement with the United States, it's not a treaty. The United States could rip up the agreement. And then what do we do when people show up at the border? The Canadian government says it's planning for this, but look, we've got the longest undefended border in the world.
Okay. Now, do you see there being an impact on the culture here?
Oh, yes. It's obvious already. We are more influenced by American media and American cultural developments, I would say, than any other country. Just think about this. We just had some provincial elections, and both in New Brunswick and in Saskatchewan, the whole issue of gender came up in a way that it hadn't been accentuated in the past. Why is that the case? Because it became an issue in American politics and echoed on American media. And Canadians are exposed to more American media than they are not only from any other country, but some of them essentially get their news from the United States. If you watch CNN, you were flooded with all these ads for Trump and Kamala Harris. Well, that doesn't exist in any other country.
Okay. Shifting gears a little bit, abortion rights continue to be a controversial topic across the United States, but surprisingly wasn't as focused on during this election. How do you see that playing out under Trump's presidency?
Well, in terms of Canada, I don't think anything is going to change. I mean, the Liberals are now saying, gee, if you elect Conservatives, it's the wedge. We're going to end up having limitations on abortion. They've been arguing this for over 20 years, and it has always come to naught. How abortion will work out in the U.S. is an issue for the Americans to sort out. But I'll make this observation. Since Roe versus Wade was struck down, in the year following, there were more abortions in the United States than there were the year before, which tells me that abortion is going to continue to happen, and probably at increased rates in the United States, whatever laws are brought in. We had abortions when it was outright criminal, and we'll still have abortions.
Fascinating. Okay, Nelson, thank you for your insight. That's political science professor Nelson Wiseman from the University of Toronto.